You've heard them call it a soft landing, right? Well, the math is telling a very different story. Right now, as we head into 2026, the Federal Reserve is completely and utterly trapped. You've got a massive $4.1 trillion stimulus package colliding head-on with inflation that just won't go away, and the bond market, it's screaming that something is about to break. Believe me, the Fed isn't just watching the data anymore. They're quietly setting the stage for a slowdown because, frankly, it's the only way out of this mess. So let's break down the evidence that the Fed actually needs a recession and, more importantly, what it means for you. The very first warning sign is this number right here, 4.29%. In January, the 10-year Treasury yield, which is basically the foundation of global finance, shot up to that level. Now, that's not just some random wiggle on a chart. That is the bond market, what a lot of people call the smart money, sending a massive flare into the sky, signaling that it does not believe for a second that the Fed can start cutting interest rates. And why is the bond market so worried? Well, it's because of this number, $4.1 trillion. That's the estimated cost of the new One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBB. This isn't just a small spending package. It's a tidal wave of cash flooding the economy, and it's working in the exact opposite direction of what the Fed is trying to do. It's become a massive economic tug-of-war. So here's the bottom line, the core of the issue. The Fed is stuck. On one side, you have that $4.1 trillion pushing everything up. And on the other, you have this stubborn, sticky inflation that just refuses to go back in its box. The Fed knows that if it cuts rates now, it'll be like throwing a lit match into a room full of gasoline. They are out of easy moves. They need the economy to slow down. Okay, so let's pull back the curtain and dig into the data that you're probably not seeing in the day-to-day headlines, because this is where the story gets really, really interesting. The story we're being told is that inflation is on its way down, but the reality is what economists call the last mile problem. It's like running a marathon. That last mile is always the hardest. You see here, Core PCE, that's the Fed's favorite way to measure inflation. It's not falling back to that 2% target. It's getting stuck. Projections show it hovering stubbornly around 2.9%. The Fed is keeping rates high, but it's just not enough to get the job done.
And the reason it's not enough can be summed up in two words: fiscal dominance. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. It's when the government's spending and tax policies are so powerful that they just completely overpower whatever the central bank is trying to do. Imagine you're in a car where the government is flooring the gas pedal while the Fed is desperately trying to slam on the brakes. You just get a lot of smoke and noise, but you don't actually slow down.
And this right here is the gas pedal being floored. The OBBBA isn't some abstract thing happening in the future. It's happening right now. It made those big tax cuts permanent. It boosted child tax credits. And get this, as people are filing their taxes this year, projections show a staggering 44% increase in refunds. That is not a trickle of cash into the economy. It is a fire hose of cash pouring gasoline on an inflationary fire the Fed is trying to put out. Now, let's pivot to the job market. On the surface, things look pretty good, right? Low unemployment, but if you dig just one layer deeper, you find what some are calling a fragile market. We're in this weird low-hire, low-fire freeze. Companies are kind of hoarding workers because they remember how hard it was to find people a few years back. But as this quote says, they are definitely not looking to hire anyone new. And you can see that freeze right here in the numbers. I mean, look at this. The slowdown is just dramatic. We went from adding hundreds of thousands of jobs a month back in 2023 to just 29,000 in early 2026. That's not a slowdown. That's the economy hitting a brick wall. This is an economy holding its breath. So, what happens when you mix all of this together? Massive government spending, a slowing job market, and inflation that won't quit. Well, the bond market revolts. Investors are now demanding what's called a term premium. Think of it as hazard pay. They're demanding extra money just for the risk of holding U.S. debt when our deficits are this huge. And that is what's pushing long-term interest rates up, no matter what the Fed says or does. This whole situation feels impossible, doesn't it? The Fed seems totally cornered. So what's their escape hatch? What is the secret weapon they have to get out of this trap? Well, it's a little-known but really powerful strategy. It's called Opportunistic Disinflation. And no, you're not going to hear them talk about this at a press conference, but it's a well-known playbook in the world of central banking. The logic behind this is actually pretty clever, in a kind of ruthless way. When inflation is stuck, you don't have to be the bad guy that intentionally crushes the economy. Instead, you just keep policy really tight, and you wait. You wait for some external shock, an unexpected recession to do the dirty work for you. You use that downturn as an opportunity to finally get inflation back down to your target. And look, this isn't just some academic theory. There are two very real, very plausible scenarios playing out right now that could give the Fed the exact opportunity that it's waiting for. Let's look at these two paths. So on one hand, you have scenario A, a new, more aggressive Fed. A new chair like Kevin Warsh could come in and decide his #1 priority is shrinking the Fed's massive balance sheet. If he starts selling off mortgage-backed securities, mortgage rates will spike, the housing market will get crushed, and that triggers a recession. Then, on the other hand, you have scenario B. The Fed does nothing. They just hold the line, they refuse to cut rates. And that, combined with all the government debt, forces those bond vigilantes to keep yields punishingly high. This starves small businesses of credit and leads to what's called a K-shaped recession, where the top 10% do just fine, but pretty much everyone else feels the pain. So this brings us to the verdict. With all this playing out, what does it actually mean for you as an investor trying to navigate the rest of 2026? Let's be crystal clear about this. The Federal Reserve will never, ever, ever say that they want a recession, but they are absolutely 100% positioned to let one happen. Why? It's simple. They have to restore their most important asset, their credibility as inflation fighters. They cannot afford to lose that battle. So what are the moves to consider? First, don't bet on a bunch of rate cuts. That easy money trade is over. The big banks think the Fed is going to hold steady for way longer than people expect. Second, look for quality. In a flat or choppy market like this one, you might want to look at companies that are actually making money and growing their dividends. And finally, watch the data like a hawk. Specifically, keep an eye on something called the SOM rule. It's a really reliable recession indicator, and with unemployment where it is now, we are right on the edge of that tripwire. And that leaves us here with the final crucial question. The Fed is walking a tightrope. Its job is to balance stable prices with maximum employment. But right now, those two goals are in a head-on collision. So which one will they choose to save? Based on all the evidence we just looked at, it really seems like they've already made their choice. And they're leaning hard toward killing inflation, even if it means jobs have to be the sacrifice.